Welcome to WebRTC Live. In WebRTC Live, we cover the latest technical topics and business use cases for WebRTC and live video. As always, this episode is brought to you by WebRTC.Ventures, leading integrators of WebRTC video into your custom application.
Welcome to WebRTC Live. I'm your host, Arin, Sime, founder and CEO of WebRTC.Ventures. We've got a very special panel discussion today about MOQ and WebRTC that I'm excited to share with you. First, let me remind you that WebRTC Live is brought to you by our team at WebRTC.Ventures. WebRTC.Ventures is a custom design and development agency focused on building live video applications. And we're here to help you take your application live. So, thank you for joining us live today on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitch, and welcome also to any of you watching a replay of today's event. For those of you with us live, you can ask questions throughout the stream by leaving a comment in whichever platform you're viewing this. And this is a session, let me tell you, where you will want to ask questions because we've got an expert panel from Cloudflare here. So let me introduce our panelists. First, Renan Dincer, Principal Systems Engineer and a return guest on WebRTC Live. Renan is going to help me keep our other two guests in line as they fight it out over MOQ and WebRTC. And then in the MOQ corner, we have Mike English, Principal Engineer at Cloudflare, where he's been leading the implementation of the first MOQ relay network, which includes MOQ running on servers in 330 cities and counting. And then in the WebRTC corner, we have Nils Ohlmeier, Principal Systems Engineer at Cloudflare, where he's been working on Cloudflare Real-Time, which is their WebRTC platform, as well as drawing on his many years in the industry, including having previously been an engineering manager at Mozilla, working on WebRTC and Firefox, as well as on media standards at IETF. So, gentlemen, are you ready to decide once and for all which is better, MOQ or WebRTC? That's a lukewarm response. Okay, so if you're not ready to decide once and for all which is better, are you at least ready to have a good discussion about it?
For sure.
Let's do it.
All right.
Off the ropes, clothesline. As the bell, MOQ and WebRTC square it off. Tie up in the center. Power against experience. MOQ off the ropes, clothesline.
All right. So we're going to have a fun discussion today. I have a lot of questions for you all, but for those of you watching us live, this is a great time to start asking your questions too. Just put them in the comments, whichever platform you're watching this, and I'll pose them to our panel as well. But let's start with some opening discussions here. Mike, I'd like to start with you. For our audience of engineering managers, probably experienced with WebRTC, but maybe newer to MOQ, can you give us the short elevator pitch? What's media over quick, or now referred to more as just MOQ, and why should we care about it as we plan to build applications for 2026?
Sure. MOQ is a new protocol being developed at the IETF. It's an open standard, and it's designed for both ingest and distribution of low latency video, but it's flexible to support any latency. And the big thing about MOQ is that it's taken kind of a layered approach. So there's a base transport protocol that's designed for fan out relays to implement. And then on top of that, streaming formats can implement more media specific features.
Great. So yeah, things like tunable latency, one of the things I hear said a lot around MOQ, for example. So we'll see how that comes into play as we talk about use cases over the course of the discussion. Nils, for your intro, I think we can assume our viewers already know what WebRTC is. So maybe you can highlight why WebRTC is still relevant and why it's stuck around for so long.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, as probably most people know, it started basically with people basically saying, like, we want to bring video conferencing into the browser, right? Before it was all like proprietary, like you had to buy certain boxes or whatever. And I think that's like still going to stick around, right? Like you still are going to have like the full integration in the browser, easy convenience with like a very small API surface, so kind of like hopefully easy to handle. I mean, obviously we all know the devil is in the detail. But I mean, that's not going to go away, right? Like if you want like low latency, like this interactive discussions or whatever, WebRTC will continue to be relevant and a good protocol for that.
Perfect. And in fact, there are a lot of devils in the details. We'll get into some of those in our time together here today. But before we go into more details, Renan, I want to ask you to share a little bit of the picture of the bigger ecosystem with us. We're talking about MOQ and WebRTC today mainly, but other technologies like HLS and RTMP have had a lot of staying power. Why is that, and what's sort of the bigger landscape?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, there's, if we portray this as a boxing match, the one person is not fighting here is HLS, right? And DASH and RTMP. I think, obviously these are very popular protocols. And the reason HLS gained popularity is because it's over HTTP. It's, ubiquitous, and there's already CDNs that support the distribution of it, widely. And, people adopted that, and like, how do we do this kind of like media transfer? RTMP obviously lost its share for the viewer side, but kept its share for the contribution side. Why is that? Because nobody implemented RTMP into browsers, right? Or smart TVs or whatever. You can do it today. Even Cloudflare supports it. You can publish RTMP and view via RTMP, but nobody really uses it because you have, all these more standard protocols. What I tell oftentimes when people say like, oh, HLS, WebRTC, MOQ, I say, HLS came from the TV people, like that came from cable and all these different things. And then WebRTC came from the phone people, like the SIP and whatever, and the phone side of things. And phone side is very latency sensitive, but it doesn't require that much scaling. The TV side is not as latency sensitive, but it requires a lot of scaling related work, right? A lot of viewers at the same time. And the most extreme is like maybe one-to-one phone call and a Super Bowl. But then these things have, different use cases along the way. Maybe like in the middle would be Twitter Spaces, right? Where you have some interactivity, but also live viewers. So there's like different points along this line. And I think what kind of MOQ is trying to solve is, why do we have so many different kinds of protocols? We keep reinventing and remuxing and reusing protocols in different ways. So how do we kind of make a new protocol? But, obviously there's the XKCD comic that says, whatever it is, like 100 protocols, and then you add a new one to replace them all. And now there's 101.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it tends to be additive rather than replacing across all the use cases. But I mean, sometimes things do get replaced, right? We didn't invite Flash to the conversation either. So things do eventually get replaced, even if a lot of times they take longer, both to get standardized as well as to get replaced than expected. But Renan, you touched on it a little bit there, but I want to just kind of quickly here, because all of you are from Cloudflare, and so I appreciate you taking the time with us. But Cloudflare is kind of supporting all across these range of protocols. What's the strategy there, Renan?
So Cloudflare doesn't care about protocols. Cloudflare is in the business of having live computers around the world. And kind of we solve problems using that. Whether, we use WebRTC to solve certain problems, like, broadcasting versus one-on-one, like there's WIP and web in IETF. We support that, as well as, we're doing some mock work now. And these things are kind of, in the end user protocols. It's very similar to how if we do, HTTP 3 or HTTP 1.1, right? Like, they're very different, but they're also kind of, can be used for the same thing. So that's the angle we're coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Similar to what I would say about, our work at WebRTC Ventures. We're here to build live video applications. So as one protocol changes around, maybe I'll regret domain name purchases that I made in the past, but nonetheless, we'll still be building video applications, and that's what we're all interested in here. So we do have a couple of viewer questions I want to get to right away here. So first of all, Override 11 says, my question is MOQ in a place that you feel we should start engineering applications using it, or more that it's something we should keep our eyes on for future work? So great question. Mike, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think it depends on the application. So if you are in a place where you need something that already has most things worked out, and you need low latency, you're probably looking at using WebRTC. But if you are in a space where you can afford to invest more in kind of future, and you're kind of like forward-looking R&D, cutting-edge applications that need something different, then MOQ is something to start playing with now. MOQ is at a point where, it's still in draft in the IETF. We're still, it's not an RFC yet. So it's still fairly early in that sense. But it's also at a stage where the spec could really benefit from more real world use and that kind of feedback loop of we have real implementations that are informing the design, so that when we get to the RFC stage, we've actually built something that's useful and not something that works on a whiteboard, but not in the real world.
Yeah, the IETF has gotten better with this in the last couple of years. So I remember in the early days, there was a lot of, they always said rough consensus and running code. But there were times when the running code part kind of got forgotten, and protocols got developed into the void. And in the last couple of years, the IETF has gotten better with the hackathons, to where the people meet before and actually try to implement the latest drafts they talk about. But I mean, that's still going to be just a few people sitting around a table trying everything locally, right? That's still far away from real world use cases, right? And so I think that's an important point, that actual people starting playing around with this around the world on the internet. We know network conditions can be completely different. That's going to be a big plus if people kind of help out, start playing around. I think that's the right, what Mike correctly said, is it's the right phase to start doing that.
And there's open source.
It is open source, so yeah, you can start using it now.
There's a bunch of different contributors, and there's prolific open source people around this right now.
Yeah, there's definitely a community being built around it already, for sure. Okay, we have another question here from Giovanni Marzo. Quick-based transport is acknowledged to perform better with regards to throughput, latency, robustness to packet loss compared to TCP. Has this been studied and demonstrated as clearly compared with DTLS? Who wants to take that?
Actually, I think I'm not sure if I would take it actually a little different, in the sense that one of the things I'm kind of hoping for is if you look at for example congestion control algorithms, right? They have been extensively studied for TCP, right? You can find tons of research papers, and up till where Quick became a thing, nobody really paid attention to to UDP, right? UDP was kind of well, it's being used for DNS, but other than that, who cares, basically, right? And I think there's still a lot of opportunity to look into this more deeply and figure out. I mean, we are facing this even when we're trying to scale our services, that hey, even on application space to kernel space, the syscalls and all of that is not really optimized for high throughput. There have been lots of optimization have been put in there for TCP, but in general for UDP, and there it doesn't matter. It's WebRTC and I think MOQ will basically face the same issues. This space hasn't been as optimized yet, hasn't been researched as much. But I'm pretty optimistic that with Quick basically gaining more and more traction, researchers will look into this, and we will eventually get similar optimizations as we have done over the years with TCP.
Great. All right. Thank you, Giovanni.
Sorry,
go
to
ahead,
answer
sorry.
the question specifically, like, I mean, DTLS, I'm not aware of anyone having actually looked into DTLS. I think there's like a couple of folks who have looked into Quick since this had come up, but I'm not aware, like, I think most of the work around like WebRTC, I think DTLS in this case, I guess, kind of like refers to WebRTC, is mostly done by corporations, like Google, obviously with their browser. Netflix has done some stuff in that area. But I'm not aware of like big research projects from actual researchers at universities.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Giovanni, for that question. For others live, you can ask additional questions anytime and we'll get to them. But I want to get to, let's call this the first round of our fight. We've had a friendly start, but it's time to really get into it. So we're going to start with a little bit of the classic showdown here, latency versus scale. Nils, I want to start with you first. So WebRTC has been the go-to for sub 500 millisecond latency for over a decade. So what's your opening argument for why WebRTC still reigns supreme in low latency applications, even in an age of MOQ?
Sure. I mean, yeah, WebRTC is optimized for like low latency, right? Like it basically most of the software stack tries to reduce, for example, the video resolution to get it through the pipe and like basically try everything it can to deliver like the audio and video in as low latency as possible, right? And like compromise maybe the quality, but like still stay on like latency is key here so that we don't have to go back to like over and out communication styles, right? And I think that's like a big use case where like WebRTC came from and where it's still going to be used in the future. Is like if you want low latency, it makes perfect sense to try and squeeze everything you can through the pipe, no matter what the conditions are, and handle basically changes in latency, handle like bandwidth changes, because we know that networks are not going to be stable. There's not like it doesn't help if you measure once and then try to get that through the pipe. If like something on the internet changes and suddenly you have to adapt, right? And I think that's what where WebRTC is really good and can shine.
Okay. All right, Mike, let's go to you. MOQ promises to combine quote unquote WebRTC latency with HLS scale. Now that sounds a bit like having your cake and eating it too. So what makes this possible within MOQ?
Yeah, so there are a couple things. One is, like I was saying before, kind of the layered approach that we're taking, in that the base transport protocol, media over quick transport, is generic and it doesn't care about payloads in the same way that HTTP doesn't care about payloads. So you don't have, for example, the need to like register a bunch of RTP headers in order to support, the particular nuances of your media. You're just sending objects as far as the relay, fan out capacity is concerned. And then in terms of the latency side of things, I think WebRTC does really good for conferencing applications, right? So like small groups of people conferencing together. It's really well tuned for that use case. After years of Google using it for Meets or whatever they've called it along the way, and similar applications, using WebRTC for these video conferencing applications, it's really well tuned for that. And you have kind of a tight coupling between the encoder and the transport layer that enables some of that. But that's not always what you want for every use case. So if you want to, for example, take a different approach and not maybe shift your bit rate of your encoder, but instead, have some of the subscribers, drop some frames and have skip ahead playback when you're delivering at scale. WebRTC is not easily coerced into doing that type of thing. Like it can be done, but you're kind of fighting an uphill battle against lib WebRTC patch sets and things like that. So MOQ, part of the idea there is to offer more flexibility in terms of how you deal with congestion, so that different use cases can handle it as they need to.
Perfect. Now you talked about some essentially new capabilities that can be done in MOQ, like playback, things like that. Certainly different than the way WebRTC is set up. But there was also like one of the blog posts recently written by Fippo kind of complained that the MOQ is often just kind of said, well, it's better than, you know, like a full mesh architecture, and WebRTC was never designed to scale, right? And while, you know, there's some truth to that argument, it's most apps don't do that type of architecture anymore, right? And modern WebRTC applications are always based on SFU and can scale quite well for most use cases, really. So what's the, you know, without using the word full mesh, let's say, why is MOQ better at scaling than WebRTC?
I think one of the ways to look at it is in terms of economies of scale. So like I was saying before, in HTTP, the HTTP layer, like protocol layer, doesn't care about the content of objects. And that has enabled like a whole industry of CDNs to emerge. And we've seen some similar things emerge in the WebRTC space. With, you know, companies that offer, you know, WebRTC capabilities. We have, you know, our own, you know, WebRTC product that does scale that up, but it's not quite the same scale as, you know, our HTTP footprint. You know, ours happens to be because we have a unique architecture where we run everything everywhere, but in general across the industry, that's not necessarily the case, and so when you separate kind of the infrastructure of moving the bytes around from the media details, you can get better economies of scale. So it's not necessarily like the protocol inherently, you know, scales better on its own. It's more kind of what are the market incentives over time when you factor things in a certain way.
Okay.
I think one of the key aspects there, not that I'm going to argue in favor of WebRTC, but like one of the technical details is basically that WebRTC tries to essentially try to run your video as long as possible with delivering an iframe, right? Like kind of like get away with like as few p frames as possible. A p frame is essentially like the diff to the previous picture, right? Like so it sent like diff after diff after diff after diff, and only kind of gives up when the receiver says, "Hey, I'm lost. Like I need to. Can we please reset?" Right? And like the good old technologies like HLS, and they're like basically like very strict. Like I'm going to cut this in every like very strict framing, basically, right? And so I think like MOQ probably has like the opportunity here. Like I mean, technically you could change it in WebRTC. Like you could if you control both ends, right? Or if you have full control over the encoder and decoder side in WebRTC, you could technically also change it to like frequently emit iframes, even though the receiver hasn't explicitly asked for it, right? But again, that's like an optimization which was chosen for WebRTC to reduce bandwidth consumption and reduce latency, right? But on the other hand, there are probably use cases where like maybe I want to be able to actually change this dynamically depending on my network conditions, or maybe I have a like reason to actually be sticking with like repeating this, right? And I think that's one of the biggest problems with like WebRTC for scaling, right? That it's like like you try to get you try to run as long as you can with p frames only, but then if you have like a big audience, like how often is it going to happen that one of them says like I'm stuck, right? And that's where like WebRTC wasn't really intended for like super large audience or like easy scaling.
Yeah, I also want to add, you know, you said WebRTC's been leading for, you know, over a decade. So I think like a lot is good about WebRTC that came out of that decade of like, you know, there's a lot more developer experience. There's a lot more default way of doing things, which is all great, you know, open source. But also, you know, what came out of that decade is like, okay, you know, people are used to deploying, for example, SFUs on specific machines and, you know, on single, you know, cloud machines. And then if you need to scale that over to many different machines, you now need a completely different, more custom architecture, where you have to kind of make it so that multiple machines subscribe to different machines, and you form some sort of tree structure for distribution, and you have to do all that signaling of that too, where like, how do you route some users to some SFUs, some other users some other SFUs, and how do you make sure, like, if some of the users want to get into the stage, right, how do you move them from being consumers at the leaves of the tree to the like root of the tree? These are like difficult questions to answer with WebRTC. And on the other hand, kind of MOQ has this primitive called a relay that is kind of signaling agnostic. It's the same signaling all throughout, right? So you can use Cloudflare's MOQ relay as well as I know somebody else's, like your own whatever MOQ relay, and like use them in conjunction, and they will all speak the same primitives, the same objects will be delivered, which is not something like it builds on this lack of signaling from WebRTC. But at the same time, I'm not going to be like super pro MOQ here. MOQ also has like lacks a lot of things that WebRTC has, like noise cancellation, right? Like you got to implement your own, and then MOQ has a lot more flexibility, but also you got to figure out how to do web codecs and canvas and blah blah blah, and there's all these other web elements. And what if you're broadcasting from a box, like on your broadcast center? Like you're not gonna run web codecs, Chrome, whatever there. So it just like, I think it opens a lot different can of worms, but then like the signaling situation is solved-ish in the MOQ world.
It is actually kind of interesting in that regard that like I think WebRTC kind of like started as with the clear goal of bringing like video conferencing into the browser. So people who started to work on it pretty quickly agreed on this needs to be like two different standardization bodies, right? Like one is the IETF for all the protocol work, but at the same time they started working on the W3C to actually standardize like how the browsers are going to handle this, right? And as a result, you basically have this like full integration from the protocol stack all the way up to the video element, right? Like as Renan was saying, like when it comes to WebRTC, you don't need to worry about like, oh, how do I decode like H.264 in this browser or whatever, right? Like it's all kind of like handled for you in a very high level, convenient API. And interestingly, like I remember like back in the days, the discussion was basically, should this whole new thing called WebRTC, should it have like a very simple high level API, or should we go like low level and have like a complex API with lots of knobs to tune and tweak things and so on, right? And there was lots of discussion about it, but like eventually they settled on like the higher level API to make it easier, because one of the arguments was like, this whole piece of technology is complex enough already, right? Like if we basically expose all the little gritty details, it's just going to make it more messy. Interoperability is going to be a nightmare and so on, right? And so I think that's a good point Renan brought up there, is like media over quick right now, at least at the current stage, since it's only an IETF thing, basically forces you then, if you want to handle it in the browser, to be able to have the resources or expertise to say like, okay, yeah, web codecs, I can do that, and I know how to paint this efficiently on a canvas, or like whatever else you choose to do. But it's not, you don't get like a out of the box solution where like, oh, like the data comes in, it gets automatically rendered in the video element, I'm good, right? And as a result, I think right now, at least with the current state, I would assume that media over quick is basically more suited to, I don't know, bigger organizations with more expertise, right? It's not like something a web developer can maybe pull up tomorrow and just get it working.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But go ahead, Renan.
I was going to say, I don't know. I've seen some web developers pull up with like full demos.
All right. We got some great viewer questions coming in, so I'm going to switch over to that. First, start with P. Thatcher G. Noise cancellation is done with media stream tracks, not with pure connections, so they can be used with web transport MOQ as well. So a bit of a comment there, but Mike, you're nodding your head. Does that sound correct to you?
Yeah, and I guess I was going to respond to what Nils was saying. Like that's very true that the history of WebRTC kind of landed on, let's have kind of this monolithic, easy to use API that the browser provides. And I think one of the places that Media Over Quick comes out of is that desire to break that back down again, to say, okay, there are a lot of cases where we wish that we had that control now, where it's been nice to like use the simple API, but like I said, that's been tuned very much for conferencing applications. And if you want to do things that kind of deviate from the norm, then you're kind of stuck. And there's been work to kind of extend that in various ways, and there are approaches to doing that. But on the whole, there's been kind of a move to break those pieces apart and have things be more accessible. And as that's been more accessible, one of the things is kind of like, okay, well, can we use a different transport and, you know, actually do more things on our own and have more complete control over, you know, how we're tuning things down at the network layer as well. And that's kind of where, you know, Quick becomes interesting. And it's kind of like, okay, rather than building an entire UDP-based protocol from scratch, maybe I can lean on Quick for retransmissions and get kind of the best of both worlds in terms of semi-reliable delivery and things like that. And then take advantage of these things that are kind of like being pulled out of the WebRTC toolbox and exposed in a browser now, so that you can access them and build your own things. It is more work to put all those Lego pieces together, but they are, you know, starting to be exposed now.
I think Peter, by the way, the comment was Peter Thatcher is like one of the former Google Chrome developers.
Thank you.
So he knows what he's talking about.
He
And I
also
think
has many
makes
other.
he has a good point there. I think like what I was like, where kind of like what I did not mention is kind of like, well, Media Over Quick right now is being developed by the IETF, so the protocol pieces underneath it. But there's nothing which prevents the overall space from also going to the W3C at some point and basically say, hey, we have now this cool new protocol and it works. Like, can we now talk about how we integrate this better in the browser, right? So that maybe web developers don't have to fiddle around with like all the bits and pieces themselves, but get like maybe some high level API. But then we're going to end up in a space where you probably get both best of both worlds again, where like you might have like a high level Media Over Quick API in the browser, which makes it convenient if you use it. And if you choose to use the low level pieces, then you still need to plug all these pieces together to get it working yourself. But then you get the more control, fine grain tweaking things according to your needs. Right?
Perfect. Yeah, and thank you, Peter, for your comments. Also, a couple others are pointing out that low-level versus high-level WebRTC isn't completely settled, and web transport, the basis for MOQ and web codecs, grew out of a desire for more low-level APIs. So kind of like you were saying, Mike, and that more work on RTCP transport and web transport still going on.
Thank you, Peter.
Peter's being humble there. He was a big part of making all this stuff possible. So.
Well, thank you, Peter. We appreciate it. A couple other. Go ahead. Sorry, Nils.
Just as an example, I think Peter was referring to like if you go back in the WebRTC APIs, like really early on, they were like super high level, and there was like another standard called ORTC, which actually tried to be like more low level, give you more control over the different pieces. And if you look, there's like I think my colleague Janivar at Mozilla called it like the 3 different stages of WebRTC APIs. That's basically was one of these things where people were basically, hey, we would want more control like the ORTC piece is giving us, right? And so over the years, bits and pieces of the ORTC API actually got kind of like imported into the WebRTC API. So it's definitely true that that over the years, folks basically said like, hey, this is actually way too high level. We want like a little bit more control. But it's like still the current APIs don't go as far down as like Media Over Quick currently exposes things.
Perfect. Thank you, Nils. All right. PK Daily 2 asked, does MOQ accommodate timing and synchronization between tracks, for example, multi-camera contribution applications? Who wants to take that?
I can take that. So at this point, timing synchronization is seen as what we call a streaming format concern. So streaming formats are kind of the layer that sits above MOQ transport. So MOQ transport is like what relays implement. And as long as you speak MOQ transport at your endpoints and your relay network, you can move objects through the system. But then the endpoints of an application need to have a way of interpreting what those objects are, and arranging things in tracks in ways that make sense to them. And that's where that's the streaming format layer. So you need a standard at that layer as well. And so we have one that's in the works called Warp, but there could be others, and it could be streaming formats that are developed outside the IETF as well. But Warp does have a concept of a timeline track that gives you a way to synchronize, group boundaries and objects across multiple tracks within a broadcast.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. This is a question I had wanted to ask too, and Giovanni's phrased it well here. Is MOQ-T expected to support better cost CPU, power efficient delivery, and higher one-to-N fan out and connection density per edge node relative to typical WebRTC SFUs? So for those of us worried about, our cloud hosting costs, I suppose, what is MOQ going to help us with that?
I can take this if you want.
Sure.
The yes and no. It depends on your implementation. But one thing's for sure, there's going to be public implementations of MOQ kind of distribution, open source, our implementation is open source. And, there's like other open source implementations. And they're all about this, right? How do you increase the efficiency of this kind of fan out system? And different WebRTC implementations might not be taking into account how do you do efficient fan out, right? Because, when you have a WebRTC SFU, people oftentimes developers think in their mind, like the first use case is how do I support, 20-person calls or whatever meeting calls, and then, not really think about how do you scale WebRTC SFUs. Cloudflare offers both of them scale. And kind of we charge by the gigabyte, and that's it. But I think in MOQ, there's going to be much more of an ecosystem, I would say, because the use case explicitly considers 1, 2, and fan out as a, original use case.
Perfect. Thank
you're
you,
still most likely
Nils?
you're still going to face like the when it comes to like cost and efficiency, I think you're going to face basically like, well, I'm getting this ingest in one resolution, right? Do I want to distribute this in like this one resolution, or do I need like convert this into like 5 different resolutions? And then do I store all the 5 resolutions? I think, all these problems will not really change, right? Like that's still like something you need to change basing on your business model and like how much are you willing to spend on re-encoding or storing and all of that stuff. I don't think that's really going to change much, because that still depends on mostly on your business and your own requirements there. Right?
And people often say, because HLS is stateless, it distributes better, right? They say HLS is stateless, it's just files. And what people forget, and people say WebRTC is stateful, thus it's less efficient. But, what people forget is, HLS is actually stateful because you have the TLS and TCP state, right? And that is managed by the kernel, and it's very efficient and very optimized, which makes people think, okay, HLS scales better because it's just files. But, there's no reason, fundamental reason, correct me, viewers, if this is wrong, that, we cannot do similar optimization around either WebRTC, DTLS, fan out, or MOQ. I think this is, more of a concern over like, what is the business needs for big companies and big scale applications who are going to invest that kind of optimization.
So as is often the case, and this is why, as Renan was talking about earlier, we go from like 100 to 101 protocols instead of, going down in protocols, is that it does often depend on use cases. And so that, along with this question from Yellow Circle Sun, are a good segue for me to the next segment that I want to do here. So Yellow Circle Sun asks about if people using WebRTC for a group conversation, do you see people using WebRTC for a group conversation and then MOQ as like a peer that handles wider streaming? So I'm going to defer your answer to that. You can come back to it at the end, but use that as a segue into our next segment here around use cases. So let's, how do I, there it is. Took me a second to find where to hide that comment so that we can go to our use case discussion here. And we're going to kind of rapid fire through 4 quick scenarios here that are maybe representative of the different types of video applications that are often built. And I want to hear Nils or Mike to quickly claim which one they think is better for WebRTC in the case of Nils or MOQ in the case of Mike. So starting with a typical 2-person video call. Who wants this one?
I think like WebRTC is still going to rule the world here. I mean, like, sure, you can implement this with media over quick if you want to. But as we discussed before, like the things are like scaling, better distribution and all of that basically doesn't apply here. This is just a pipe between people and you want that with low latency. I mean, maybe someone is going to do it over media over quick, but like, I don't think it's going to be a big use case.
Mike, is there any reason someone should use MOQ for this?
People have done this over media over quick already.
Sure.
And one of the reasons that they want it is kind of in answer to that question of, okay, maybe your call starts as 2 people, but maybe you want to broadcast to a large audience and you don't want to deal with a bunch of transmuxing and repackaging and switching between protocols. If you natively are already using MOQ, then, it gets easy to distribute as well.
All right, you're cheating there a little bit, Mike.
Agree,
we're going to get to distribution use cases.
I think the peer-to-peer element of WebRTC also makes this compelling. Like WebRTC being able to have the option to go peer-to-peer direct between just 2 people or a small group. That's pretty compelling, and that's not an option with MOQ today. Like web transport in a browser currently is not peer-to-peer capable.
All right. Second use case, live concert streaming. So we've got, a live stage and let's say 50,000 people watching this concert. Who wants this one?
I mean, you can do it with WebRTC, but I think this is where I would see, either you I guess like today people do use WebRTC for this or low latency HLS, right?
Right.
But I would expect this is basically the use case where a media over quick eventually will shine. Because of the problems we talked about before with WebRTC. Like if you fan out to like a big audience, you will always have like people who have bad network conditions but they go back like all the way to the center. Yeah, you can break that up again. Like it just makes the whole architecture a lot more complex.
Yeah.
I love your picture that you used for the concert. Is concert use case like interactive? I would ask you.
Yeah, this is my question.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if
Because
it's just
HLS
flat out streaming, it's HLS, exactly. But assuming that we want some more
DASH.
cooler modern features in there around interactivity, then yeah, MOQ is a great use case for that, right? All right, third, speaking of interactive and real time, but low latency, super important here too. Think about a live auction scenario. Mike wants it. Why do you want it, Mike?
Yeah, I think getting at that interactive use case is like this is where MOQ can really shine. Is you may have a large audience, but you want short delay between what's happening in the live stream and the audience that's viewing it and interacting. That's definitely a use case that MOQ is kind of designed to cater towards.
All right, perfect. And our final use case, an online classroom. We've got a teacher, this primary presenter, they're sharing their screen, and then, maybe there's, let's say, 30 students watching this. Who wants this one?
I mean, I think you can still do that with WebRTC. Like in terms of like, I mean, I guess it depends on what you're like. If we talk webinar, right? Like maybe like related closely, where like you only expect one person to talk the whole time and present something, then maybe WebRTC is not your go-to solution. But if we talk about an actual classroom where like the expectation is that at least half of the kids or students basically raise their hand and ask a question or answer a question from the teacher. It's like it's not super wide scaled. You want the interactivity. It's more, it feels closer to like a video conferencing scenario to me than anything else. And I mean, sure, you can do it with mediocre quick if you want to. I guess it depends on like how much effort you want to put into, or you're willing into building this solution.
Yeah,
Right.
I think some of the reasons that you might want to use media real quick for this are the reasons that you might want to like rebroadcast this with HLS later, or like have a recording. You know, the cases where you might want to do something different with your encoding format to facilitate later reuse or things like that. So if you have this as it's low latency, but it's using CMAF, and you're doing it over MOQ, and then you can reuse those objects for HLS later. Like there are scenarios where MOQ might be compelling here, but again, it really depends on the exact details of your use case.
There's also another like interesting thing to think about where these use cases also have often side use cases where you would typically use data channels in WebRTC. But also there's like use cases where innovative use cases where like, they have what they point cloud streaming, like these like VR and all these like interesting, like innovative things. Those things don't often map very well into WebRTC media primitives, and they often get mapped to things like data channels, but it's like not super good as well. And I feel like MOQ is interesting there as well. Like where these like, a lot of things that we shove into data channels and not try to worry about. Yeah.
That makes sense. All right, our time has flown by today, but that's thanks to great participation from you all and from our viewers. There are just a couple of quick viewer questions that I want to close with. So first, a name we'll all recognize here, dressed for the holidays in his photo, Sean Dubois from the Pion project. Have you seen any higher level APIs for MOQ yet? My favorite group of developers are those that know nothing about video. How do you think they will build things in a MOQ future? Great question, Sean. Go ahead. Anybody who wants to take that.
Yes, I think this is a space that like Luke Curley in particular has done a lot of work kind of looking into what does this look like from a developer experience perspective, and what does a library interface look like. He and I worked together on early versions of MOQ-RS, trying to like figure out the right shape for that interface, and he's done a lot more work since then, especially on kind of the TypeScript API. So he's definitely working on that angle of things. So I would look to Kixelated to see what he has for higher level APIs.
All right, sounds great.
It's kind of scary to me, this conversation, a little bit, like at this early stage, for like a default primitives, because I think like the base layer of what MOQ2 is, like T is kind of being defined, and like there's some examples, but I think like as that settles, I think like winners might emerge, or like different container formats or streaming formats for different use cases might emerge.
Perfect. Okay, and we've also got a lot of great comments being asked, just complimenting you all on the conversation. And so thanks everybody who has been tuning in and sharing those comments and your kind words about the conversation today. I'm going to close with the last question here for any of you. Any of you can take this from generic LinkedIn user who says, I don't know that person, I don't think. But for an organization that is currently using WebRTC happily, what would shift the tide for them to invest into MOQ? So the other way I would say this, the other thing you can answer here if you want is if, if someone asks you, should I use WebRTC or MOQ in my application? What's the first thing you ask them in response to help them figure that out? Since your first answer might be, it depends, going a little bit beyond that.
It depends, yes.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, if you assuming it's like today using WebRTC, I would assume that it's like browser based, and maybe if like Mike mentioned before, like the ease for recording, that's like something that's typically like a pain point with WebRTC, right? Like that's not easy to get done right. Another pain point often is like WebRTC on specific hardware, limited devices. Kind of that area is also something which is like a very often like a pain point, right? And maybe a desire to like reduce like code complexity or something like this, because you're no longer dealing with like ICE, DTLS, and SRTP on top of it. But I mean, that's like switching. If assuming we have a working solution, switching it from something which is working to media over quick would be like a really big investment. So like I would want to see like really strong arguments in favor of doing such a big project.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mike, any counterpoints to that?
No, I would have a very similar answer. Basically, if there's something you can't do with WebRTC, like if you run up against something where it's like, oh, I want to do this, but I'm going to have this like huge hack to make it work with libWebRTC, or I can't get the behavior I want out of the browser, or it's going to be challenging for me to get a WebRTC stack into this environment. But there are a lot of costs. There are a lot of things that you have to do on your own for MOQ right now, as the ecosystem is still getting going.
All right.
I think.
Sorry, Renan. I was going to give you the last word anyways, but I will say that if you had to hack libWebRTC, that's probably your red flag that you do need to consider using MOQ, I suppose.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about.
Renan, the last word goes to you.
I was just going to talk about like that. If you this LinkedIn user's job is being made extra hard, I think, because Sean is contributing left and right in the WebRTC ecosystem. And, Sean is like making OBS do WebWeb, and, like getting all these like, writing like Python that makes a lot of people's job easier, hacking libWebRTC. And, there's features within WebRTC that also like allow you to have tunable reliability as well, like a MOQ does. So I think like for a good engineer, both protocols, both things are very, very similar. But I think maybe in the end, what it might come to is developer experience and like, the ease of understanding and the primitives, things like, browser support, but also kind of the economics of, peer-to-peer first protocol and having to run your own SFUs with your own signaling versus using a public relay that has like X amount of pricing, and kind of separation of concerns around not having to have your own backends or having some sort of a custom signaling that is not part of the standards. I think it'd be great to have we'll see, but I think like having at least the server side component of relays being taken out of concern and the MOQ side is a good thing. I think both the protocols have I think good life ahead of them for sure. I mean some of the things your boxing match in this one. So
all right, well, let's end on that note then. Because my podcast room reservation here is about to end. So I'm afraid, otherwise we could keep talking for a long time. This has been a great conversation, guys. Really appreciate it. But both protocols have a long life ahead of them. You heard it from Renan first, but great discussion. Yeah, thank you all for watching today. Thank you to Cloudflare for permitting all of you to share some time with us and your expertise. And thanks everyone for your comments. Really appreciate it. All right, the battle continues between MOQ and WebRTC. But in just a moment, I'll have Tsahi joining me for our industry analysis segment, where this time I'm going to make Tsahi give us some rapid fire predictions for 2026. So stick around for those insights. First, let me remind you that this video will be available on the WebRTC.Ventures YouTube channel, as well as on our blog at WebRTC.Ventures. Our next episode of WebRTC Live will be Wednesday, December 2nd, 12:30 p.m. Eastern US. Our guest will be Chris Allen from Red 5, and we'll be talking about the use of AI in real-time video. He's got some really interesting use cases to share, so be sure to join us for that discussion. Put it on your calendar now. To find out more about upcoming episodes of WebRTC Live, be sure to follow us on social media at WebRTC Ventures on Twitch, LinkedIn, YouTube, and join our email list at WebRTC.Ventures. So thanks everyone for joining us today. And regardless if you plan to build your application with MOQ or WebRTC, hopefully we can all agree on one thing: let's make it live. Thanks for joining me today, Tsahi. Would you like to play a game?
Okay, let's see what goes on this time.
All right, it's November 2025 as we're recording this, which means it's a good time to start thinking about predictions for 2026. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions and put you on the spot for a rapid answer to each question. You've got 90 seconds or less to answer each one. All right, first one, WebRTC versus MOQ. Which one will developers be complaining about more in 2026?
WebRTC.
Why?
What you have in MOQ today is their early adapters. All of the enthusiastic people, they would love it. They would die for it. And then you'll have people like Sergio that says something, well, you know what? It doesn't really work. It doesn't take the right trajectory, but that's about it. All the rest are just in love. I don't think that will change.
Okay, fair enough. So as more people adopt it, people will complain a little bit more when there's a dilution of the enthusiasts
Yes, I think
there.
there's also the nuance of where this is going to be production ready.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as it isn't exactly and the standard isn't closed and they're going to make changes to it, why complain? It's fine.
Right. Perfect. All right, good. All right, we're doing great on timing here. Will AV1 become the dominant video codec in 2026?
No.
When will it? Or will it?
If it will, probably 2028.
Okay. A few years away.
Yes. Now, the reason I'm saying that, you see AV1, it's being used. People love it. Takes too much CPU today, so you can't use it in a lot of the use cases. You use it only when you can. And you still see a lot of people using VP8, which is great because it just works. Now, 2 years from now, guess what? The VP8 will still just work. So if I need to put an effort to switch to AV1, that's an effort that I don't want to put. So all of the old stuff would still use VP8 or H.264. VP9 you see here and there. It didn't really catch up in all services. And I think that would be the eventuality of AV1, at least in the next year or two.
So next question, edge computing for WebRTC. Hype or happening?
What does that mean?
Good question. So I'm going to say it as WebRTC running on the edge, for example, like in IoT devices. Sometimes talk about security use cases, wearable devices, drones, AR-enabled factory workers, remote equipment monitoring, those types of things.
I think it will be more of the same. It will grow slowly, nothing really interesting or exciting there, more than what we've had so far. It's out of necessity. I mean, most surveillance cameras today still do H.264 and RTSP. Why? Because it just works. And if you want to connect it to WebRTC, you put the headache on your service side. And you see people doing that, and then the question is, why should I invest in put it in the camera? So I think you'll see it only in new devices and only in very specific and niche use cases. Drones make more sense than surveillance cameras, for example.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So happening, but in limited use cases, which is more or less the scenario now. All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Little open-ended here. I'd like to hear you name a dark horse technology that will disrupt WebRTC in an unexpected way.
In 2026,
You could go a little further than that if you need to.
there can only be one, and that would be MOQ.
Okay.
That would be, let's call it the development of what was web codecs, web transport, and WebAssembly.
Mm-hmm.
Putting these three together with a bit of MOQ instead of web transport gives you a great enabler to do things that you can't really do with WebRTC, or the ability to differentiate in ways that you can't with WebRTC.
Yeah.
It will be used by either crazy startups, okay, or by vendors that are very competitive. So you might see either Google with Google Meet or Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe Microsoft Teams, not sure, but maybe. And then it might be also Cisco with WebEx that would decide to go and take that route.
Mm-hmm.
Will that work? That's a big question. This is the path that Zoom started with and left in the end of 2024. So would they go back to it a year or two from now? I'm not sure.
Last question. What's
Mhm.
one popular WebRTC practice, currently popular, which we will soon consider a bad practice and anti-pattern? What should we be getting away from, basically?
I think there are two of them. I just did a new video series, and it falls right in there, where I say things like, well, simulcast is great, but don't use simulcast.
Okay.
Okay, so the best practice is to use simulcast in group calling, and then you figure out things like, well, you know what? Most of my calls are still one-on-one in group calls, and when there are only two people in a call, like what we're doing now, and that's a group session, using simulcast is not good for your health. It's the opposite. So there are places where you need to, let's say, refine that best practice to tell you that, well, you should use simulcast, but not in all cases. That's one. And the other one would be SVC, scalable video coding. That has been the holy grail for about 10 years now, especially since VP9 came out to our lives. It's still not there. Will it be there with AV1? Probably not. So is that the best practice that we never had and did? And at some point we'll say, you know what, it's not worth it?
Yeah.
Or will it stay there? That's another unknown. I would say that we also might see the rush towards the next best video codec die out. Same as we don't talk about 4K almost.
Right.
You know, we talk about HD video and we do VGA.
Perfect.
So what is the purpose of going 4K? It's not going to add anything to the quality of this call. In my videos, for example, when I do them in portrait mode, I always think to myself, well, should I do it in 1080p or 780p or 720p? Because I want to fill out my hard drive with another 1 gigabyte of data for 5 minutes, or is 200, 300 megabytes is enough? And that's a question that I'm not sure that I know how to answer, and that's not for a live session, for something that is recorded and should be in high fidelity, high quality. You also see YouTube just came out with the ability to do higher, how do you call it? They upscale videos.
Okay.
So if you recorded something in like VGA, they would still play it back as HD to the user by upscaling it using AI. Hyper resolution, I think it's called. So that being the case, do I even care now about recording things in HD video? Is it worth my time and effort to do that? Should I just reduce bit rates and resolutions instead. Do I need to put the effort in a better video compression technology or a better AI technology on the receiving end? It's like, I don't even know what the best practice is going to look like a year or two from now with these things.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. What's better, to have the higher resolution stored on your disk or to let AI do the higher processing to upscale it for you? TBD. All right. Well, as always, thanks for sharing your insights with us today, Tsahi. Thanks for sharing the rapid fire predictions for us on the spot for 2026. We'll see how you do next year. So for those of you watching, to learn more about Tsahi's work, you can check him out at bloggeek.me. And to learn more about future episodes of WebRTC Live, check us out at WebRTC.ventures. Thanks, Tsahi.
Thank you, Arin.
Thanks for joining us for WebRTC Live. Visit our website at WebRTC.ventures to learn more about our custom design and development services, and to learn more about upcoming episodes of WebRTC Live.